D2 Word Life here
It's
with...
kitty cat time!
Before I was rudely interrupted, D2 Word Life here with... Rip freaking has freaking goddamn small kitten tides.
Her name is Cream.
And apparently
Or
he's
then
got a
there's my
dog
brain.
too. Yeah. Great, now this reaction is like, oh, let's react to how many animals come in frame that you have. Oh, you got 2 dogs now. God damn, this is one long intro to this freaking video now. And now he's getting engulfed. But today, our real reaction today is gonna be. I know it's been a while since we've done a reaction video, but since it is October, Halloween month, we decided to react to some MrBallen all month. While apparently also at the same time reacting to Riptidz getting distracted by his animals. I can only imagine the top comments being like, show us more animals.
Great move!
And today we're reacting to the worst family traditions ever documented by MrBallen. Now, there's a disclaimer, this is for mature audiences only, so sorry Riptidz, you gotta leave.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dustin. You have to leave. End of video. Goodbye.
So I'm just gonna wait until all the immature people out of the room. Riptidz, you may step aside.
Dustin, you may step aside.
Man, I'm more mature than you, bitch.
Well, at least we don't have Matt.
Oh, then he'd really have to leave. I'd be like, click, you're out. And yeah, Matt, if you're watching this, that's just a joke. It was Lil Rib. Ha ha, funny, funny. But anyway.
Well, he's always saying that we don't invite him, which sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, because he always leaves.
Yeah, but that's another story. That's another complaint story for another day. But anyway, let's just get to the nitty gritty here, and well, let's freaking
He's like a dog.
let's bring it on. What do you got for us today, MrBallen?
For 3 strange but true stories. Fair warning, the top story today is absolutely repulsive, so if that's not your thing, you've been warned. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, wait until the like button has left for their summer vacation, and while they're gone, completely decorate the interior and exterior of their house for Christmas. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories.
Over the horizon.
Over the horizon.
On the morning of September 23rd, 1839, an experienced sailor named Captain Brighton stood on the deck of his ship, which was traveling through the Drake Passage, which is located right along the northern coast of Antarctica. He and his crew had sailed here because they were professional whalers, and they had heard there was this massive population of whales in the Drake Passage that basically were untouched by humanity because basically nobody sailed this far. This was a freezing cold, very austere part of the world, kind of a dangerous place to be. But so far, Captain Brighton and his crew had not seen a single whale. And on top of that, the Drake Passage had proven to be as dangerous as expected. Just the previous night, the ocean around the ship had literally frozen, basically anchoring the ship in place. And so when this happened, Captain Brighton realized, there was nothing they could even do about it.
Just a picture that for a minute. That would be a sucky ordeal.
Yeah.
Being on a freaking whale ship surrounded by ice, you can't do nothing. Can't go nowhere.
And a bunch of unknown whales.
Mm-hmm.
They were stuck. And if this didn't break up soon, they'd be stuck here all winter potentially, and it was unclear if they could actually survive that. But fortunately, also the previous night, this massive storm rolled in, which, that's dangerous in and of itself. But the severity of the storm was actually a good thing because it broke up the ice around the ship and allowed Captain Brighton to sail away. And so now, that morning, the ocean was again, liquid, so they were able to move around. But Captain Brighton had a very difficult decision to make. Again, so far they have not caught any whales, and they've invested a lot of time and money to get out here.
Okay.
But, if he stayed out here much longer, he knew they could potentially get stranded again, and he just couldn't let that happen. And so he needed to decide if he was going to keep on sailing further into the Drake Passage to maybe find a couple whales, or leave now before it was too late. But as Captain Brighton weighed his options, he suddenly noticed something over the horizon. There was this dark shape. And at first, he actually thought he was hallucinating, because really, there's nothing else out here. It's just him and ocean and ice. That was it. But as he continued to stare in the direction of this dark object, which was actually getting closer to him, he realized it was a real thing, and in fact, it was another ship, which was really surprising, because again, nobody really comes out here. And so his instincts were, okay, this has got to be a rival whale ship. I mean, that's the only other people who would come out here. But as he continued to stare at the ship, as it got closer, he realized it was not a whale ship. It was actually a schooner, which is a ship designed for traveling. But as Captain Brighton stared at the schooner that was getting closer and closer, he saw it was in pretty rough shape. I mean, the hull and the sails were very tattered. I mean, there was something off about the ship. But Captain Brighton was thinking, hey, I know you can get trapped in the ice out here. It happened to them the night before. Maybe this crew has gotten trapped in the ice. They've been stuck out here for who knows how long. They could be in pretty rough shape. And Captain Brighton knew they actually did have, at least at that moment, quite a bit of supplies, at least some to spare. And so he called out to his men to ready a dinghy and get some supplies because they were going to go over to this schooner and basically offer up some extra supplies and also check in on them and make sure they were okay. And so once the supplies were packaged up and put on the dinghy.
Okay, knowing that they found another ship out there in the middle of basically nowhere, where do you think this story's going to lead to? Basically, what do you think this story's going to lead to?
Yeah.
Knowing how these balling stories go, you're probably 90% correct on that one.
Yeah, I had to grab my charger.
4 other men hopped in the dinghy, and they began paddling over to the schooner. And as they got closer, the waves were pretty bad, and so they're kind of jostling around, and, the ship itself, the schooner, is also moving, and so that's moving up and down. But, periodically, as they got closer, they'd be able to look into the portholes, which are like windows on the side of the schooner, and Captain Brighton could clearly see there were people inside of the schooner. He called out a few times, but it was windy and sort of loud, and he couldn't really tell if any of them heard him or if anybody called back. And so eventually, Captain Brighton and his crew, they got to the side of the schooner, and they just climbed up the ladder and boarded the ship.
Okay.
And once they were on the ship, once they were on the deck of the schooner, they're looking around, and everything was in working order, albeit sort of tattered and in rough shape. But the weird thing is nobody was out on deck. They had seen people in the portholes, which was inside the ship, but there was nobody above deck. And so Captain Brighton's thinking, okay, this is pretty weird here, but we clearly just need to go inside and talk to someone. And so Captain Brighton and his men walked across the deck to this door that led into the ship. It actually led into the captain's quarters, at least, based on basic ship construction, that's what they expected it to be. And so Captain Brighton, he gets to the door, he knocks and calls out, announces that they're here with supplies and just to make sure everybody is okay. But there's no answer. All they can hear is the slapping of the water against the ship. There's no voices,
suspicious.
There's nothing. It's silent on the ship. And so Captain Brighton eventually just opens up this door, and sure enough, he looks into this dark space, and it's the captain's quarters. And there's a desk towards the back of this room, and there's a man sitting at the desk with his back to them. And so Captain Brighton, he takes a cautious step into the captain's quarters, and he calls out to this man who clearly appears to be the captain. But the man doesn't say or do anything. He's clearly focused on something at his desk. And so Captain Brighton exchanged a worried glance with his men and then just decided he would walk across the room and go physically interact with this guy and make sure he was okay and see what was going on here. And so slowly, Captain Brighton began walking across the room, and as he did, he called out a few more times to this man who appeared to be the captain, but he didn't get a response. And then finally, he was right behind the man, and he actually looked down and read what the man had been writing. This is what it said. Trapped by icebergs. Despite all efforts, the fire went out last night. No hope remains. However, as unsettling as that would be to read for anybody in this situation, what was the most unsettling part was actually what was written right above that journal entry. The date, January 17th, 1823, 16 years before. That captain and his entire crew were all dead and had been for 16 years. They got trapped in the ice just like Captain Brighton had, but it didn't break up. They were stranded and they all froze to death. And because it was so cold out in that part of the world, all their bodies were basically preserved in their final moments. And so the captain of the ship, before he died, was making an entry to say what happened. And then down below, when Captain Brighton and his men went to go look, they found people playing cards who had literally frozen to death while playing cards. They found a woman lying in her bed with her dog. That's how they froze to death. They found people in the dining hall, and they died right where they were sitting. It was like all these people had been frozen in time for nearly 2 decades, just floating around in Drake's Passage. And basically nobody had found them until Captain Brighton.
I don't know how to respond to that.
That's just creepy.
Imagine being out there yourself on a ship in the middle of the freaking ice. And all of a sudden you see another ship freaking show up and you're like, oh crap, there's people on that ship. We gotta help them. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, what's this? Why does the date say the year 2000? Say as this was 2025. You're like, those are dead bodies all over here. All right.
Yes.
You'd be like,
But just imagine seeing someone that died 16 years prior to your sail, and then your ship luckily had the ice break so you could get away, and theirs didn't.
you consider yourself lucky on that. They should consider themselves lucky on that one. Otherwise, that could have been their fate too.
Yes.
On the runway.
On the night of May 20th, 1958, a young man named Ram Thapa walked towards the entrance of an abandoned airport in eastern India. He was trailing behind 3 other men. They were his boss, another employee of his boss, and then a friend of his boss. It was pitch black outside, and so all 4 men had flashlights. But Ram also had something else. He had a huge knife. So the reason they were there is Ram's boss was considering buying this airport. However, there were these rumors.
Why the huge knife? Do you think he's compensating for something?
Yes, his lack of ego.
Sorry, I gotta make these jokes for me. Sorry.
Floating around that this airport was now haunted ever since being abandoned. In fact, people said, the old hangars and rusted out buildings were infested with ghosts. Now, Ram totally believed that this place really was haunted, but Ram's boss wanted to go and check it out, before he actually considered really buying this place. And so he had recruited these 3 other guys, Ram included, to go basically on a ghost hunt. And so going into this, Ram's boss and the 2 other men, they're sort of like, okay, this is intriguing. It's kind of funny that we're going on this ghost hunt. But Ram, he was terrified. He did not like the idea of going into this airport, especially at night. He fully believed there were ghosts out here. He had brought the knife along to protect himself from ghosts. But
Boy, are you gonna protect yourself from a ghost with a damn knife? Are you gonna stab the ghost to death? What the hell?
How would a knife protect you from the ether when they're already dead?
Makes no sense. It's like that would be like bringing a gun to a friggin' goddamn ghost hunt. What are you gonna do?
Is it a ghost knife?
It's like, what are you gonna do?
Is it freaking Danny Phantom here?
Exactly. And second of all, I'm kind of with the freaked out guy because I wouldn't want to go ghost hunting either, to be honest. Fuck that. Screw that.
You would go to a haunted airport
Screw haunted
if someone
anything.
paid you.
Screw haunted anything. You ain't dragging my ass out there.
All of a sudden,
His boss is basically-
we just go on a trip, and then you're like, "Where are we going?" Oh, we're just going to an airport.
I'll be like, nope, I'm not going with you. Bye-bye.
telling him
No,
that
you're
he had
no,
to
you're
go, and so
on the trip.
Rom was
You're
there.
like,
And so Rom's boss reached the
is it
gate,
haunted? Like, no,
unlocked it,
it's not
pushed it
haunted.
open. And as it slowly swung open, it made this horrible creaking sound. And for the first time, all four men are getting an unobstructed view into the actual property. And it's totally, again, pitch black, and they're shining their lights inside, and all they see are just these old hangars and different big buildings and broken down planes, but there's no movement. It's totally dark and it's quiet. And so Rom's boss and the other two men, they're walking along, and Rom's in the back, and he's so uneasy, he feels practically sick to his stomach. I mean, everywhere he looked, he would think that he saw a shadow, a ghost staring back at him, but he would shine the light and, nothing would be there. And so this whole time they're walking, he's totally on edge, and eventually they reach the actual runway. And when they got there, instead of shining their lights kind of straight out in front of them, because there was basically nothing out ahead of them, it was just, where planes go to take off and to land, they began shining their lights predominantly off to the side, where there was this huge hangar, and they were all shining their lights in the different windows to see if, anybody was inside of there. And so they're all kind of focused off to the side, and Rom, the whole time, he's totally terrified here. And as, his boss and his friends are kind of shining their lights over here, Rom takes his flashlight and he aims it straight out in front of them. And he sees maybe a couple 100 meters away, just off to the side of the runway, is what appears to be this floating orb. And immediately he keeps his light trained on this orb, and he signals to his boss and the others like, hey, look at this. And they all turn and they're kind of like, joke.
Nope. That'd be my first sign to leave right there.
No, you'd be like, oh, let's go investigate this.
Be like, nope, not me. Not me. I've seen too many ghost videos and Arctic Cake Reacts videos to know, nope, that's a bad idea. I'm not investigating shit.
No, you're like, ruh-roh, Shaggy. It's time to go.
I ain't investigating nothing, Scooby.
Looking around, and they shine their light, and they also see it. They see this floating orb. It made no sense. They noticed that there was not just this orb of light, but there was something below the orb of light, like on the ground. Something was moving, this grayish figure, or multiple figures were kind of like moving around right beneath this orb. But before any of them could say or do anything or react really in any way to whatever it was they were looking at, the dark figures right below the orb, as they're being illuminated by all their flashlights, it was like all of a sudden, whatever they were, they turned, and all these eyes glinted and looked directly back at Rom and his colleagues. And it was like something inside.
One word in that situation. Run!
Run!
Of Rom just clicked. He was so scared. He'd been terrified from the moment they got here, and the whole time he had been so primed to protect himself if he had to with this knife. And it was like when he saw these eyes, he didn't have any idea what they were, but he knew they were evil, and if he didn't act, they were doomed. And so, without saying anything to his boss or the other two men, with knife in hand, Rom took off running towards the figures. A few hours later, Rom and his colleagues were no longer at the airport. Instead, they were at the police station, and Rom was in handcuffs. It would turn out those figures that they spotted that Rom went to go confront with his knife were not actually ghosts. Instead, they were three women who had come onto the airfield as well, but just to pick flowers. That orb of light that the men had seen was just their lantern. Rom had been so convinced they were ghosts that he had taken off and attacked them with his knife, believing he was not only protecting.
Oh my God! You see what you get for assuming now you done screwed the pooch. Now you got assault charges with a deadly weapon on you. Now he's got assault charges with a deadly weapon on him. Jesus Christ! What you get for screwing up?
You would do the exact same thing. Don't even say.
I wouldn't have done. I would have just turned my ass and ran the opposite way. I wouldn't go in there and be like, charge.
Yes, you would.
No, that's something you would do. I'd just be running the other way. Be like, nope, I'm out of here. I want nothing to do with that. But see now, look what you did. You done screwed the pooch.
protecting himself, protecting his boss and the other two men. However,
I'd
he
be
had
just
been wrong.
charging in to
These were
fight
just
the
women.
like,
He
yeah,
killed one of them, and
What?
I said, yeah, that would actually kind of be me because I'd be like, yeah, I get to fight a ghost. Let's go.
went to go confront with his knife were not actually ghosts. Instead, they were three women who had come onto the airfield as well, but just to pick flowers. That orb of light that the men had seen was just their lantern. Rom had been so convinced they were ghosts that he had taken off and attacked them with his knife, believing he was not only protecting himself, but protecting his boss and the other two men. However, he had been wrong. These were just women, and he killed one of them and severely wounded the other two. And so ultimately, he was charged with murder and assault. However, when he went on trial, he was actually acquitted of all charges because the jury genuinely believed that Rom actually thought he was attacking ghosts, not people.
So he went with the insanity defense.
So the boy basically got away with freaking assault and murder. Okay.
Well, I'd just be charging it. I wouldn't be killing anyone. Yeah, let's go fight a ghost. What, you wouldn't be impressed with seeing someone say,
What?
I said, yeah, you wouldn't be impressed if someone said, oh, they fought a ghost one.
People beat John Cena in the ring, and we can't see him, and we don't hear people bragging about it.
Yeah, but he's not a ghost.
You can't see him though.
Yeah, but they went with the insanity defense though because he legitimately thought that they were ghosts, so they let him off.
That story wouldn't fly around here.
Yeah, it was wrong, but you could also say that he was legitimately scared out of his mind that he literally thought they were ghosts and he was trying to protect his boss and his friends.
Anyway, moving on to the next story. I'm going to try not to pause as much. Got one more to go. The family ritual.
A family ritual.
Or a family ritual.
On April 9th, 2005, in Kaohsiung City, Taiwan, a young man was home alone inside of his apartment watching TV. And as he sat there watching TV, he heard a loud thumping sound coming from right above him. As soon as he heard it, he muted his TV and he listened for a second, and a minute later, he heard it again, a loud thump. And then he heard another one, and another one, and another one, and before long, all he heard was a succession of thumps and also what sounded like chanting coming from upstairs. However, as unusual as these types of sounds might be to the average person, to this young man, these actually weren't that weird. Because the family that lived right above him, the Wu family, were pretty eccentric. They were very religious people who often did these ceremonial dances and rituals at all hours, and a lot of times they involved stomping around and chanting really loudly. And as annoying as that could be, this young man never complained. He was very respectful of the Wu family, and he knew, these sounds he was hearing were connected to their religion, and he felt like that was none of his business. And so, like he did basically every other time he would hear these noises, he simply turned the volume up on his TV and tried to forget about them. But after a few minutes, it was like the noises coming from upstairs just kept getting louder and louder and louder until it was basically impossible to ignore. And then suddenly he heard a scream coming from upstairs that certainly did not feel attached to a ceremony. It sounded like somebody was in danger or in trouble or something. And so at that point, the young man turned the TV off and he stood up and he thought, I need to go up there and make sure things are okay. I mean, forget being annoyed.
What do you think's going on up there?
Sacrificial sacrifice and shit. They're sacrificing someone.
That's an oddly specific freaking explanation, but okay.
It sounds like
I've
someone's
seen
in
a lot of things on TV and on YouTube and shit.
Okay.
And read a lot about rituals.
trouble or someone's hurt or something. But as he began making his way towards his door to go upstairs and check on the Wu family, all the noises just completely stopped, and it was silent upstairs. And at that point, the young man just stopped where he was. And for a minute, he just listened, waiting to see if maybe the noises would pick back up again. But they didn't. And so the young man just turned around, walked back to his seat, and turned the TV back on. 2 days later, on April 11th, that same young man was back home all alone, watching TV yet again, when, once again, he heard a loud pounding sound. Except this time, it was not coming from upstairs, it was coming from his front door. Somebody was hammering on his front door trying to get his attention. And so the young man turned off the TV, he got up, and he went over to his door, he opened it up, and standing there on the landing was this middle-aged man named Wu Shan, who was the patriarch of the Wu family upstairs. And Wu Shan looked absolutely horrible. He was dressed all in black head to toe, but he was pale and skinny and very gaunt, and he was covered in what looked like filth, like food and ash, and he smelled unbelievably horrible. And the young man, he asked Wu Shan, hey, is everything okay? And remember, the young man's thinking about that crazy, loud ceremony they had just 2 days earlier, wondering, whatever happened with that? That was so loud. But Wu Shan just looked back at the young man with this kind of vacant expression, and he just said, "Call an ambulance." And then, without saying anything else, Wu Shan turned, ran down the steps, and disappeared out into the street. And so at this point, the young man is left just standing there having no idea what to think. I mean, Wu Shan did not look well, and he's now run away.
That's a little weird. I'm pretty sure it'd be weird if your neighbor showed up to your house looking like total crap, and all they say was call an ambulance, and then they run off down the street disappearing.
Yeah.
That'd be concern for a red flag right there. Right.
Yeah.
Away. And again, this young man is thinking about that bizarre ritual he overheard a couple of days ago that just kind of stopped abruptly after screams were heard. Now he's being told to call an ambulance, and so he's thinking, I better go upstairs and make sure things are okay before I do anything else. And so the young man left his apartment, went upstairs to the Wu family's apartment, and the door was shut. But even standing outside the door, he began to smell that same absolutely horrible smell that he smelled on Wu Shan. And so he knocks on the Wu family's door, he's kind of covering his nose, but he doesn't get a response, nobody comes to the door. And so after looking around, he just tried the doorknob, and he found it was unlocked. So, pretty apprehensively, but knowing he needed to see what was going on here, he opened up the door, and right away he's hit with another wave of just this disgusting smell. He can barely breathe, but nonetheless, he steps into the house and he calls out to anybody, anyone come over here and tell me what's going on. But nobody called back, and he kind of looked around the family's apartment, and it was totally filthy. There was just this grime all over everything, and he made his way all the way into the living room. And there he stopped, because in the middle of the living room on the floor, he saw something that he just simply couldn't believe. It would turn out the Wu family had performed a ritual 2 days earlier. That was the sounds that the neighbor downstairs had been hearing. Those loud stomping and screaming, all that stuff was a ceremony like the family was known to do. However, that ceremony got totally out of hand. So in the weeks leading up to that ceremony, one of the Wu family's daughters came down with an illness. And because the family didn't have a lot of money, they couldn't send her to the doctor. And after a couple of days, when she didn't get better, the family decided that, okay, well, she must not be physically sick. She must be spiritually sick, meaning she was possessed by a demon. And so at first, they tried some ceremonies to ward off this demon, but it wasn't really working. And then before long, the rest of the members of the family began complaining that maybe they too were also possessed by the same demon. And before long, that was the belief that the entire Wu family shared, that they all were possessed by demons. And so on the day the downstairs neighbor heard all that stomping and chanting and screaming, that was the day that the Wu family performed a big group exorcism to try to get rid of these demons once and for all from all of them. But the way they did this exorcism was truly horrifying. They believed that the one thing demons were afraid of was filth. And so they decided that if they filled their bodies with enough filth, the demons would leave. And so the Wu family, as they chanted and stomped around and screamed, began consuming their own feces. And when they would vomit it back up again, they would just swallow it right back down for hours and hours and hours. What the downstairs neighbor actually discovered inside the living room of the Wu family's apartment was the daughter, the one who originally had gotten sick, and she was laying on the ground and was deceased. And during the autopsy, they would discover that her airway was totally blocked by feces and vomit. By the time the downstairs neighbor made this discovery, the entire Wu family had fled the apartment. Wu Shan had disappeared after saying calling an ambulance, and the rest of the family too had kind of run off. But the police would ultimately track down all the remaining Wu family members, and they would all be arrested. However, a court ultimately decided that the Wu family was suffering from something known as mass hysteria, and as a result of that, they could not be held legally accountable for what they did. And so, they were all acquitted.
That's bullshit.
In case you haven't heard yet, our newest graphic novel...
What the hell did I just hear? Forget about the family being acquitted, but what the hell did I just hear? That's just disgusting.
That's bullshit. They should have been held accountable for that shit. They killed their own daughter.
That shit's disgusting.
And then they leave her body for dead. Well, she was already dead at that time, but they left her rot. And didn't even call an ambulance themselves. Had their neighbor do it.
Yeah, that's one of the most disgusting. Okay, it's not the most brutal story I've heard, but it's up there as probably one of the most disgusting stories I heard. And trust me, I heard a lot of them. But that one ranks up there. Ugh.
Well, one of them we've actually reviewed here, which was the Scream.
Oh yeah, that one. That one was that
where she actually fed her husband to her kids.
The Miss Cannibal story.
Yes.
Yeah, that one was screwed up. So that one was screwed up too, more ways than one. But this last story was just disgusting. Like on the freaking like cringe nasty scale. Anyway, I'm gonna have a hard time sleeping tonight after thinking about hearing that story. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed our reaction to this, and we will see you all in the next one. Peace.
Deuces.